Hello there and welcome to another one of my videos. Today we're talking about what comes first, memory or identity. You could also reframe it as in who wins in the competition of influence, memory or identity. Because we all intuitively know that our memories influence our identity. This is nothing new. But our identity also influences our memories. And this is done through something called reconsolidation. So usually we think that memory works like a perfect archive or like a recording, but it's more like putting stuff together. So memory is a rebuilding an event from fragments, and when doing it, the memory is slightly unstable and can change. So the rebuilding, or this thing that happens when we remember, implies that the simple act of remembering can actually change the memory. And the rebuild is influenced by who you are now, or who you are when you remember, instead of who you were back then when the memory actually occurred. So the influence goes both ways, and that's what we're going to talk about. And this idea of reconsolidation is not something that I cooked up on my own. It's something from like neuroscientists and things like that. So when we recall and these small edits occur, they can be small, but they can also be bigger. But the idea is that a memory will never be exactly the same each time you remember it, because you are not identical each time you remember it. So every time it changes a little bit. So what makes memories trustworthy then, if they're changing and this and that? Well, we would like to believe that accuracy is what makes us sure about our memories. But what makes us the most sure about our memories is actually how often we've repeated them, or how often we have remembered them. So the more you actually have revisited a memory, the more trustworthy it is to you. It's not more trustworthy because it's more accurate, but because you've revisited it more. But how do we what happens when we combine this with the idea that each time we revisit a memory, we slightly distort it? Well, it has a kind of scary implication in which, or not scary, but maybe slightly problematic implication, in which that basically would be that the memories that you trust the most are also the ones that have been reshaped the most. Now, obviously, this sounds a little bit stretched, and I think it is. Most memories are still trustworthy. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I think the concepts get more clearer like that. And it's not necessarily all bad, or it makes sense in a way at least, because memory has one goal and your identity has another. The ideal memory just makes sure that it preserves information. But identity tries to do something else. Identity tries to basically maintain a coherent story about yourself, so that the idea of yourself matches up with what you remember of yourself. And accuracy that we want from memories, and coherence that we want from our own self-image and our identity, are not the same goal. So of course there might be some clashing between the two, because your identity wants you, the protagonist, to be basically explained by your memories for explaining who you are and why you are the way you are. So what might actually identity do to our memories? Well, if the memories don't fit your current self-image, probably they reframe the things a little bit to fit. It might maybe change some emotional tones when you interpret your past, and it maybe moves responsibility around from whatever situation you're thinking about. So for example, instead of thinking I failed, which you might think in a moment, 10 years down the line you will say, oh, I was young, instead, because you're a different person, and it makes the story make sense. And this is probably the exact explanation to why people sometimes form their own convenient personal narratives about past situations, which happens a lot, I think. But I also don't think that this is all bad, that this is some innate fault that we have. Probably, like most things, it has its own little purpose, and it might be a necessary mechanism to make sure that our sense of self stays stable, especially in periods of change or during hard times. Because it doesn't seem that useful either to be very unsure about who you are. And so keeping that more or less stable through all the ups and downs and changes around us seems kind of useful as well. So I'm not just criticizing this whole thing. So what is the result of this collaboration between identity and memory? I think it's to maintain the feeling of continuity. Most people, or I think in general, almost all people, can see some kind of thread running through their life, like a main storyline. So even after different jobs, different relationships, different beliefs, and all of these things, you still feel like you were the same not the same person, but it was still you going through all of these things. Now what's interesting about this is that this continuity isn't sitting somewhere in the past. It couldn't have been formed back then when the memory was first formed. The continuity is constructed in the present and is kept coherent in the present in the moment that you choose to remember something. And that's where the editing occurs. And I thought that was maybe interesting. Maybe it's not that interesting, but I thought it was interesting. And this also aligns with the idea of narrative identity. Narrative identity comes, I found this on Instagram, so it's maybe not the most trustworthy source. But apparently this philosopher Paul Ricoeur, or something like that, he called this whole thing narrative identity. Basically, his idea is that the self isn't something you discover. Like people always say, oh, you need to discover yourself and this and that. He called bullshit on that. He said that the self isn't something you discover, but it's the story you maintain, which fits perfectly into this whole theory that we got going on here. And of course, if you need to maintain a coherent story, these stories also require some editing from time to time. And another thing that I think could be involved in all of this is selective memory. Selective memory, I think we all do it. People tend to remember things that confirm their identity instead of things that go against it. Maybe they don't forget things that go against their sense of self, but at least they downplay it a little bit. And people like to remember feedback that matches their self-image, and they tend to not consider feedback or don't like feedback that challenges it. Now, what does this mean? Well, this means that yourself, this could mean that your sense of self theoretically could become like a closed loop. Because if it's influencing your memories a lot, then it's actually selecting evidence that sustains itself. So it's like it could spiral basically. I think it doesn't spiral though, because I think we're all kept pretty grounded by reality. It's pretty hard to deny reality. And we also have people around us that constantly call us on our bullshit. It's hard to remember things wrong when someone else is there to tell you how it really was. And you see every day around you how reality actually is. So you can't go and spiral completely, inventing your own narratives and all of this, just because your sense of self wants you to be something that doesn't fit your own memories. We could also maybe relate this a little bit to self-help. Self-help always says revisit the past, reinterpret it, heal from your past and all of these things. But if you think about it, you don't actually have access to the past. You only have access to a version of it. And this version is remembered or is determined by the version of yourself that is remembering it. So it's all a bit biased and it's all a bit influenced, and it's not so, maybe not the way we like to imagine things to be. So what is actually the implication of all this, or what can you actually take away from all my rambling? I don't know. I think the main idea is that your identity is partly shaped by the memories that you revisit, and also based on the interpretations that you repeat again and again. So based on what you choose to remember, and based on how much you repeat the things. And I think the most interesting thing, or the most useful thing from all of this, is that what you choose to remember regularly slowly starts to become part of who you are. And this is kind of nice in a way as well, because that also gives you some power over yourself and who you want to be. It's always nice to know that you're not a complete victim of your circumstances, and that you can influence who you are. And by choosing the memories and choosing what to repeat from your going over again from your past, you can influence who you will be and who you will become. And I think that's a nice thing to consider, and a useful thing to remember as well. Now that was all I had to say about this topic. If you have any insights or you want to say something, please leave a comment. Also, if you completely disagree with everything I said, you can also leave a comment and tell me about that. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.